Usually when we talk about being lost, uh, we imagine a physical space, right?
Yeah.
Like you take a wrong turn off the highway, you end up on some dirt road, and you just pull out your map or your phone to find your way back.
Right. It's a very temporary problem.
Exactly. It has a clear geographical solution. You just figure out where you are, you turn the car around, and you move on.
Right.
But, I mean, today's deep dive is about a completely different kind of lost, a kind that seems to be quietly taking over right now.
Yeah, it really is everywhere.
It's the state where the map itself is just kind of dissolved, the landmarks have vanished, and you, the listener sitting right there, you are just frozen in place. And whether you're 24 and staring at the ceiling trying to figure out your career, or you're, 55 navigating a massive life transition, that feeling of being profoundly, inexplicably stuck is something we all face.
It's universal at this point.
So our mission today is to figure out why we feel this existential paralysis, and more importantly, how to break free. We've got a fantastic stack of sources to guide us.
We really do.
We're looking at a huge 2026 qualitative study on Generation Z's existential paralysis, a psychological review of Viktor Frankl's monumental book, Man's Search for Meaning, and some really practical insights from Jay Shetty on finding purpose.
Which is such a powerful combination of ideas, because psychology is finally starting to give a proper name to this feeling. When we look at that 2026 qualitative study, researchers are literally calling this phenomenon existential paralysis.
Existential paralysis. It sounds heavy.
It is heavy, and exploring why this is happening is incredibly revealing. Because we aren't just dealing with a lack of direction here, we're dealing with a fundamental breakdown of how we form our personal narratives.
Yeah, the study uses this term, coherence displacement, which just feels so painfully accurate.
It really hits the nail on the head.
Right. It describes this psychological state of feeling detached from a stable, integrated sense of self. And the cruel irony is that it hits you precisely during a life stage where the world is just loudly demanding that you have total clarity.
You're supposed to have the 5-year plan.
Exactly. It feels less like taking a wrong turn and more like trying to navigate a road trip where your GPS keeps glitching and recalculating.
Yeah.
Like you aren't just lost on the road. The road itself is literally disappearing while you drive on it.
That shifting destination is the key to all of this. I mean, developmental psychology points to a period called emerging adulthood, which is roughly between the ages of 18 and 29.
Okay, so your 20s, basically.
Right. And historically, this has always been a time of identity exploration. You try on different hats, you figure out who you are. But the data shows that this expected period of exploration has kind of hardened into a documented global crisis.
A crisis, really?
Yeah, a severe one. We're seeing a quarter-life crisis prevalence that ranges from 40% of emerging adults in places like Greece all the way up to 77% in Indonesia.
Wait, 77%?
Yeah, this instability has just become the global baseline.
I mean, looking at those numbers, I have to push back a little bit. Are we just pathologizing normal human development here? Haven't 20-somethings literally always felt a bit confused? The whole lost graduate trope isn't exactly new.
Well, the angst itself isn't new, you're right about that, but the psychological landscape where that angst takes place has fundamentally changed. What we're seeing now is a widespread experience of ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss.
Yeah.
Like grieving something that isn't totally gone.
Exactly. In traditional psychology, ambiguous loss usually refers to something like a missing person, a traumatic loss that lacks closure, right? You don't have a grave to mourn at. But on a macro level, today's emerging adults are experiencing ambiguous loss regarding their own futures.
Oh, wow.
They're grieving this predictable, safe life script that they were implicitly promised as kids, but that script is just slowly vanishing.
Because the world is so unstable.
Right. The study highlights these intense global stressors. Like 75% of the respondents cite gun violence as a daily psychological weight. And that's alongside the continuous slow burn threat of climate change and political instability.
So they're dealing with this chronic grief for a future that hasn't technically ended yet. I mean, you can't hold a funeral for the concept of a stable career or a safe environment.
Yeah.
So that grief just stays unresolved in your nervous system.
Which is exactly what shatters what we call narrative coherence. You see, narrative coherence is the way we regulate our emotions.
How does that work?
Well, when we can tell a structured, meaningful story about our lives, like where we came from, what we're doing, where we're going, we feel psychologically secure. But when you combine this ambient, global, ambiguous loss with a complete lack of traditional life
The
scripts,
story just falls apart.
it breaks down completely. You can't form a story. And when the brain cannot form a coherent story, it defaults to a freeze response.
And there's your existential paralysis.
Right there.
And if we really want to understand why that freeze response is so severe, I think we have to look at the daily environment where these broken narratives are playing out. The study calls Generation Z mobile natives who had a cellular childhood,
A cellular childhood, yeah.
which means they adopted smartphones in elementary school. The device didn't just alter their habits, it literally became an extension of the self, like an extension of their cognitive process.
And the behavioral shifts driven by that cellular childhood explains so much of this paralysis. I mean, Gene Twinge's data is stark here. By 2016, 12th graders were spending 6 hours a day on digital media.
6 hours.
Yeah.
Just staring at a screen.
Every single day. And the direct consequence of that is something researchers term social atrophy.
Social atrophy, like a muscle wasting away.
It operates on the exact same mechanism as muscle atrophy. If you put a limb in a cast and don't use it, the muscle physically wastes away. Our neurological capacity for face-to-face connection, for reading microexpressions, for handling the minor frictions of real-world interaction, it's physically wasting away from lack of use.
I mean, the ripple effects of that social atrophy are honestly staggering. I was reading this section on the decline of romantic relationships, and there's this massive rise in sexual inactivity.
The numbers on that are really surprising.
Yeah, 15% of the 1990s cohort have had no partners since age 18. That isn't a small statistical anomaly, you know?
Yeah.
That is a massive societal shift driven by this retreat into solitary digital activities like endless gaming or just doom scrolling.
And a big part of that retreat is due to the complete loss of the third space.
Oh, right, the third space. Explain that for a second.
So sociologically, humans need 3 distinct environments to really thrive. The first space is home, the second space is work or school, and the third space is community.
Like a cafe or a church or a park.
Exactly. A place you gather without the expectations of productivity or domestic duties. It's just for connection.
But now those boundaries have entirely collapsed. Like you sleep in your bed, you roll over and open your laptop to work from that exact same bed, and then you socialize by scrolling on your phone, still in that same bed.
The bedroom has literally become the entire universe.
There's no physical transition to signal to your brain that you are shifting into a different facet of your identity. It's all just mashed together.
And that boundary collapse forces the brain into a state of chronic fatigue. But, you know, there is a nuance in the research here that is really important. Not all screen time is equal.
Okay, so it's not just screen equals bad.
Right. The mechanism really depends on active versus passive engagement. When researchers parse the data, platforms that facilitate direct, active interaction like messaging a friend on WhatsApp or hopping on a FaceTime call can actually lower feelings of loneliness.
Because it mimics real conversation.
Exactly. It has that reciprocal nature of real connection.
So it's the difference between actually talking to someone and just watching people through a window.
Yeah.
The passive consumption platforms where you're just endlessly scrolling Reddit or swiping through curated dating app feeds, those are the ones driving the isolation.
Yeah, absolutely, because you aren't connecting. You're comparing your internal, messy reality to everyone else's highly curated external highlight reel.
Which just fuels FOMO, right?
Yeah.
Fear of missing out.
FOMO, and what researchers call identity manipulation. You are constantly managing this digital avatar of yourself, which requires immense cognitive load. And this identity is policed by the threat of cancel culture.
Because one wrong move and you're out.
Right. From a neurological standpoint, the amygdala processes social rejection the exact same way it processes physical danger. So socially anxious individuals vastly overestimate the cost of making a minor social blunder.
If a joke falls flat online, it feels like a literal existential threat.
Yes. So to protect themselves, they just withdraw entirely.
They stay in the cast, and the social muscle just continues to atrophy. So we've got this perfect storm. The map is broken because of ambiguous loss. The environment is causing social atrophy, and we're terrified of making a wrong move.
It's incredibly paralyzing.
But, I mean, we can't just delete the internet or magically resurrect these community third spaces overnight. If we want to get unstuck, we have to find a way to operate within this reality.
You have to adapt.
Right. And this is where the insights from Jay Shetty on finding purpose really clicked for me. Because he tackles the internal mindset when the external world is just completely unchangeable.
Shetty's approach is fascinating because he reframes the very nature of what it means to feel stuck. I mean, we typically think being stuck means we don't know what to do next, but Shetty suggests that paralysis is actually a grieving process.
Grieving, like we talked about earlier.
Yes, but specifically grieving a past version of yourself.
Mm.
You are holding on to an old identity, an old habit, or an old expectation that simply doesn't fit the reality you're living in today.
It makes so much sense. I kind of think of it like trying to renovate a house while you are still living inside it. You know you have to tear down the walls of your old identity to make room for the new one, but you're terrified to swing the sledgehammer because you still need a roof over your head.
That's a great way to look at it.
You don't want to let go of the old self until the new self is fully built, so you just sit there in the dust, totally paralyzed. But Shetty talks about using your current situation, even a job you absolutely hate, as a launch pad rather than a prison.
And that shift from prison to launchpad is a textbook example of cognitive reframing. You accept the reality. Okay, I dislike this location, but you change your psychological relationship to it.
By extracting what you need.
Exactly. You extract the skills you need for your future, like resilience, negotiation, communication. You learn while you're there. It's the exact mechanism demonstrated in a very famous Yale study of hospital cleaners.
Oh, this study completely changed how I view daily work. So the researchers looked at two groups of people doing the exact same grueling, often totally invisible work of cleaning hospital rooms.
Right. They worked the same hours, they made the same pay,
The external reality was completely identical.
but their internal realities were entirely different. One group viewed themselves strictly as cleaners. They focused on the mechanics of the job, emptying trash, wiping counters, and they reported incredibly high levels of misery and burnout.
Which is understandable. It's hard work.
Of course. But the other group viewed themselves as healers. They engaged in what psychology calls job crafting.
Job crafting. I love that term.
It's powerful. They believed that providing a sterile, organized room gave a vulnerable patient dignity, and that it actively contributed to their physical recovery. They would even do things like rearrange the artwork in a coma patient's room, just in case the patient woke up and needed something comforting to look at.
That is just profound. They didn't change a single task in their actual job description, but by changing the narrative coherence of why they were doing it, they completely insulated themselves from burnout
They found purpose in the exact same room where someone else found misery.
because they understood the distinction between passion and purpose. Right?
Yes. Shetty makes a really crucial differentiation here. Passion is self-directed. It's what brings you joy, energy, and fulfillment.
Like a hobby.
Right. But purpose is other-directed. It is taking your passion and using it in the service of others. He uses the example of his wife. Her passion is cooking. But when she started using that skill to prepare meals for the homeless, the passion evolved into purpose.
The psychological weight of the action shifted from just consumption to actual contribution.
Exactly.
But okay, here's where it gets really interesting for our listener. If we apply this to someone who is in the thick of that existential paralysis, someone whose map is totally blank right now, how do they even begin to find that purpose?
It's tough when you're overwhelmed.
Because when you were completely burnt out, the idea of suddenly discovering your grand life's mission feels like just another massive, impossible task to add to your to-do list. It's like being in an ABA cover band and trying to do all these complicated costume changes while the song is still playing. How do you shift your mindset when you're just exhausted?
That pressure to figure it all out is exactly what keeps people stuck. To bypass that pressure, Shetty advocates for a behavioral mechanism called sampling.
Sampling, like trying out different appetizers.
Pretty much, when we are paralyzed, we demand certainty. We want the grand master plan before we take a single step. Sampling removes that demand for certainty. You just collect low-stakes experiences right now.
Okay, give me an example.
You take a random coding class, you volunteer for one weekend at a shelter, you read a book completely outside your normal field. You trust that your brain will synthesize and connect the dots later.
You don't need to see the picture on the front of the puzzle box. You just need to start picking up the pieces.
That's a perfect analogy.
So if Shetty is telling us we can mentally rewrite our relationship with a miserable job or sample our way out of burnout, I have to wonder what the absolute limit of that is. How bad can the external reality get before cognitive reframing just stops working?
It's a fair question.
Which leads us directly to the psychological review of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Because if we want to test the absolute limits of human endurance and the power of internal narrative, Frankl is the ultimate baseline.
Frankl truly represents the most profound application of these concepts in human history. For context, He was an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi death camps.
The darkest possible circumstances.
Unimaginable horror. He lost his wife, his parents, his brother. He lost his entire external world. Yet from that experience, he developed logotherapy, which essentially translates to healing through meaning. And it was a massive paradigm shift in psychology at the time.
Because the dominant theories back then were completely different, right? Like you had Freud arguing that human beings are fundamentally driven by the will to pleasure. We just want to avoid pain and seek gratification.
Right, the Freudian model.
And then you had Adler arguing that we are driven by the will to power, this desire for dominance and superiority.
But Frankl looked at the reality of the camps and realized both of those theories completely fell short. Because when you strip away all pleasure and all power, what is left? Frankl argued that our primary undeniable biological drive is the will to meaning.
And he proved this by observing the social and psychological structure of the camps themselves. The prisoners went through these distinct psychological stages. First was the initial shock, followed by a deep apathy and emotional numbing just to survive the daily horror and eventually depersonalization.
But Frankl noticed a really devastating pattern among a specific group of prisoners at the absolute bottom of the camp's hierarchy. They were known as the Muselmänner.
The Muselmänner, who were they?
They were the individuals who had not just lost their physical strength, they had completely lost their why. They stopped fighting for extra rations, they stopped avoiding the guards, they simply gave up.
They just surrendered.
Completely. Frankl recognized that their physical collapse was merely a secondary symptom of a total collapse of meaning. Survival was inextricably linked to holding on to a future-oriented goal or a deep connection.
And Frankl outlined 3 specific paths to finding that meaning, even in the darkest possible circumstances. The first is creating a work or doing a deed, having some task that requires your unique contribution.
Right, a sense of duty.
And the second is experiencing something or encountering someone, which is essentially love and human connection.
Yes, very powerful.
And the third, which I think is the most vital for our conversation about feeling stuck, is the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering.
That third path is really the cornerstone of logotherapy. Frankl called it the freedom of attitude. He said that when you cannot change a situation, you are challenged to change yourself.
Wow.
And if we connect this back to the existential paralysis of the modern world, modern psychology recognizes a parallel state to the Muselmänner phenomenon today. It's called learned helplessness, and it's a core component of severe depression.
Learned helplessness.
Yeah.
How does that manifest?
Well, when an animal or human repeatedly experiences painful stimuli that they cannot escape, they eventually stop trying. Even when an escape route is later presented, they don't take it. They learn that they are helpless.
They freeze. They stare at the glitching map and just refuse to put the car in drive.
Precisely. But Frankl's freedom of attitude is the direct antidote to learned helplessness. You cannot control the macroeconomic climate, you cannot control the digital algorithms, and you cannot control the global stressors causing this ambiguous loss.
The external world is out of our hands.
But the final, untouchable human freedom is choosing your response to those circumstances. You always retain agency over your internal narrative.
Which brings us to the absolute hardest part.
Yeah.
Actually executing that choice in a world that constantly pushes us toward isolation. I mean, Frankl tells us that encountering others' love is the primary path to meaning.
Yes, it is.
But we started this whole conversation by diagnosing a massive epidemic of social atrophy. So how do we practically rewire our lives for connection when the social muscle is completely wasted away?
This is where synthesizing Shetty's modern behavioral advice with Frankl's heavy philosophy creates a really practical toolkit for us. Shetty points out a massive cognitive bias in how we relate to others today. We judge other people by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions.
Oh, this happens all the time. Like if a friend leaves me on read and doesn't text back for 3 days, I immediately judge their action. I assume they don't care about me, or they're secretly annoyed with me.
We catastrophize it.
Totally.
Yeah.
But if I forget to text someone back, I know my intention was good. I know I was just overwhelmed with work or stressed out. Shetty argues that to rebuild connection, we have to flip that script, right? We have to start giving others the grace of assuming good intentions.
And doing that immediately lowers the barrier to re-engagement. It takes the pressure off. Shetty also addresses the toxic comparison fueled by our digital environments with what he calls the let them theory.
The let them theory.
Yeah, we spend so much time paralyzed by envy, looking at people who seem to have their maps perfectly figured out online. But envy is a passive, paralyzing emotion. He suggests turning jealousy into an educational curriculum.
I love that framing.
Weak people envy those ahead of them. Strong people study them. You analyze the mechanics of their success instead of resenting the outcome.
Let them have their success and just take notes.
Exactly.
And to actively rebuild that atrophied social muscle we talked about, Shetty advocates for non-transactional connection, which is such a simple but totally disruptive habit in today's world.
It really is.
You just send a text or make a call to someone when you need absolutely nothing from them.
Yeah.
You don't want a favor. You aren't making weekend plans. You just reach out to say, hey, something reminded me of you today. Hope you're doing well.
It breaks the cycle of utility. It proves to both your brain and theirs that the relationship has inherent value, not just functional value. And he pairs this outward connection with a very specific internal mechanism for gratitude.
Right, because traditional gratitude journaling doesn't always work.
It often fails because of hedonic adaptation. Our brains are wired to quickly get used to good things. If you just write down, I am grateful for my health every single day, the phrase loses its emotional resonance. It just becomes a chore.
So Shetty suggests breaking that adaptation by imagining the absence of the thing. Instead of forcing yourself to feel warm and fuzzy about your baseline reality, you imagine what your life would be like if it were suddenly removed.
It's a powerful mental exercise.
Like you stub your toe, and instead of just cursing the furniture, you actively imagine the reality of not having a foot at all. Suddenly, the fact that your foot hurts becomes this weird miracle, because it means the foot is there. The gratitude becomes visceral, not just intellectual.
It resets your neurological baseline entirely. But, rebuilding these connections does require an immense amount of vulnerability.
It does, and honestly, it feels risky. Because let's play devil's advocate for the listener here. If I commit to sending these non-transactional texts and I try to assume good intentions, what happens when I am the only one putting in the effort?
That's a very common concern.
Relationships today often feel incredibly one-sided. If I continually reach out and the other person never checks in on me, doesn't that objectively mean my effort is just wasted?
That is a completely natural fear, but it is rooted in a transactional view of human connection. We've been trained to expect relationships to operate like a vending machine.
I put $1 of effort in, I get $1 of affection out.
From that exact machine. But Shetty offers a much broader perspective. He says, love is a circle. When you pour your energy, grace, and non-transactional effort into someone, they might be dealing with their own existential paralysis. They might just not be capable of returning it right now.
But the effort doesn't just evaporate.
No, it doesn't. The love and energy you put into the world will return to you, but almost never from the exact source you gave it to.
Oh, that's interesting.
It will return from a completely unexpected direction. A stranger who offers you grace on a bad day, a mentor who goes out of their way to guide you, a new friend who steps up when you really need them. If we rigidly demand that love must be returned by the specific person we gave it to, in the specific way we want it, we act like someone pulling down the window shades in a dark room.
We just block the light that is actually freely flowing toward us from a different window.
Exactly.
Man, we have traveled incredible distances in this conversation. We started with the disappearing map, the realization that an entire generation is dealing with coherence displacement and the ambiguous loss of this promised future.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We looked at how our digital environment, the loss of the third space, and passive screen time are physically atrophying our ability to connect. But we also mapped out the escape route.
The mechanisms really are there for anyone to use.
Exactly. You can engage in job crafting to turn your current frustration into a launch pad. You can embrace Frankl's absolute freedom of attitude to reclaim your internal narrative, recognizing that even in the most restricted environments, your response is your own.
Nobody can take that from you.
And you can start rebuilding your social muscle through non-transactional connection and giving grace to others. By leaning into these tools, you aren't just waiting for the map to fix itself. You're actively drawing a new one. And honestly, for you listening right now, just by being here, listening to this and wrestling with these concepts, you're already taking the first, most crucial step out of paralysis.
The mere act of seeking understanding is a rejection of helplessness. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final fascinating concept from Frankl's logotherapy to mull over. It's a psychological principle called noodynamics.
Noodynamics. How does that fit into the puzzle?
Well, it challenges everything modern wellness culture tells us. Society constantly pushes this narrative that a successful life is a perfectly balanced, stress-free life.
Right. Good vibes only.
We are told we should strive for complete inner peace and zero friction. But Frankel looked at human biology and psychology and argued the exact opposite. New Dynamics states that a life completely free of tension is actually a recipe for the existential vacuum.
So we need the stress.
Frankel argued that a healthy, necessary amount of tension, specifically the polar tension between who you are right now and the person you wish to become, or the meaning you have yet to fulfill, is absolutely required for personal growth.
So the discomfort isn't a glitch, it's the engine.
Exactly. So, as you go about your week navigating whatever glitching map you are currently holding, consider this. What if the friction, the anxiety, and that deep existential tension you are feeling right now isn't a sign that you are broken?
What if it's supposed to be there?
Right. What if it doesn't mean you have taken a wrong turn and ruined your life? What if that exact uncomfortable tension is the biological force required to pull you out of paralysis, force you to grow, and propel you toward your true purpose?